as dentistry has moved to a group practice model, the good news is, a lot of practices check all these boxes that DSOs are looking for, as opposed to 10, 15 years ago. We really didn't see a lot of these, multiple doctor, multi-specialty, multi-million dollar rev practices. Whereas today, I feel like they're everywhere. This is the more common model and the growing model in dentistry, which is good. But it does bring about some challenges when it's time to monetize the business, because a lot of times when it's a multi-doctor practice and the senior doctor is ready to monetize their equity interest, whether that's a minority equity interest or a majority equity interest, it's almost a no-brainer if their runway is less than 5 years or so to go the DSO route, especially in a practice that's high revenue, high EBITDA, because the gap between the traditional private buyer valuation and the DSO valuation is going to be significant. But now we've got a middle-aged doctor and maybe a doctor in their 30s that are partners and or associates, and it's a much harder to convince them that it makes sense for them to go the DSO route because their runway is significantly longer than the senior doc. We deal with this on a daily basis, and the trend I'm seeing more and more is that the founder, the senior doc, brings in minority partners along the way. And then when they're ready to finalize their succession plan and their ultimate exit from the business, they've built this very large, valuable business and they want to monetize it in the DSO world. Even if they have a tag along, drag along right and a unilateral legal right to sell the business without the consent of the minority partners, there's no way you can get a deal done if the minority partners are major producers and they're not swimming the same direction. Because the DSO is going to come in and say, hey, again, key man risk, we want everybody to be on board with this transaction. And if the future of the practice, those minority partners are not on board, you as the senior partner have a serious problem. And recently we've seen some associates and or junior minority partners hold the founders hostage when they're ready to monetize the remainder of the business. So a few things you need to think about if you are that senior doctor is, one, you need to be thoughtful regarding the conversations you have with your associates and your minority partners regarding equity and succession planning. And if your goal is ultimately to monetize a piece of the business in the DSO world, you need to make sure that that game plan is laid out from day one. And one thing you may want to consider rather than selling equity to associates is give them some sort of profit share and gift it to them. And it may function, it's going to be far lower than the equity amount you would sell them, but net economically, you can make the financial outcome congruent. But the way that profit share functions at a liquidation event is that if you have that tag along, drag along right, and you have that unilateral legal right as the founder and primary owner to sell the business to a DSO down the road, if for some reason your associates or minority partners aren't willing to participate, they forfeit that profit sharing interest. So that's a way to protect yourself on the backside. And one of the reasons we like profit share interest as opposed to gifting equity is because if you gift equity, it's a taxable event. If you gift a profits interest, it's not. And you can set that profits interest up in a way that it converts to real equity at a liquidation event. So we're trying to coach doctors on utilizing that strategy more so than selling equity or gifting equity to associates. But look, I think at the end of the day, what you need to understand is that all the major producers in the practice are going to have to be on board if and when you want to pursue a DSO affiliation. And if they're not, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have to find a way to incentivize them to transact.
It's a really great conversation to have. That's why I was interested in talking to you about it, because I knew it was there. We hadn't really talked about it before, but just in my many years of orchestrating a lot of different kinds of transactions, not so much in the dental practice realm like you do, but other transactions, and seeing these variables come up. You said it's best for the senior doc to have this laid out in advance. Well, how many are going to do that? Look, realistically, we never know what we don't know.
Right.
So so you have to backtrack. Let me ask you about the profits interest because I do agree. Just in my overall philosophy is I'm not a big fan of giving equity, but I am a fan of profit share, profit interest. I do agree that that's the way you empower, engage people to be rowing the same way. I'm assuming that's being paid out all along, but you said, if they don't go along with the tag along, drag along, which means senior doc controls everything, he can force things, but then, as you said, if the other producers don't go along, then he's kind of in trouble. So he's been paying that profit share all along for some period of time. And then if the associates in this case don't want to go forward, they lose it. But am I correct? If this is not a vesting period. Are
There
they
is there
getting
is
paid?
there is no vesting period
Yeah.
typically. You would at the
Right.
appropriate time when you feel like you would have sold that person equity, rather than
Hmm.
selling them real equity,
Yeah.
you look at, okay, well, if I was going to sell them 20% equity, how would that be valued? What would
Hmm.
the payment on that buy-in look like? And what would be their net cash flow benefit after that equity payment is made?
Right.
And then you can back
Got it.
into what the appropriate profit sharing alternative interest would be, comparatively
Hmm.
speaking, so that economically it's essentially equivalent.
Yes.
And
Okay.
yes, you immediately start paying that profit share. It might be 2%, 3%, 5% profit share. So they get 5%, let's say, of the ongoing EBITDA of the business. And then at a liquidation event, which could be a DSO sale or private equity partnership, they have the opportunity to convert that profit share into equity and participate alongside you financially as if they were equity owners. But if they're unwilling to participate, they forfeit that equity. And I mean, that could still do damage, right? If they don't participate, they forfeit that equity, you lose a producer, what have you, but it's designed to influence behavior. Otherwise, if you don't set it up that way and they own real equity and they block the sale, there's really no
Mhm.
penalty. So it's much
Yeah.
easier to stand in the way of a transaction than if you have something at risk that you could potentially lose.